Welcome everybody to another episode of the Perceptive Podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. We have another live developer interview lined up for those of you catching it live or enjoying this recorded on the site. He is a returning guest and friend who has been working on a variety of RPG and strategy RPG designs over the past decade. His latest game is Together in Battle, which at the time of this stream has just been released on Early Access, and he's here to talk about that as well as more on RPG design. So please welcome back to the cast from Sinister Design, Craig Stern. How are you doing?
Hey Josh, thanks for having me. I'm doing all right.
I know it has been very hectic for you getting the game finally out on Early Access, and congratulations on it.
Thank you. It has been an absolutely absurd amount of work.
Seems like that's always the case when I talk to developers about games these days. But as I was just telling Craig, I just finished writing my book on RPG design that I think even being the longest thing I've written, just barely scratched any discernible surface. Because I remember I posted on Twitter how do we even define what an RPG is these days?
Yeah, that's a whole topic unto itself.
But it's great to have you back on, and for anyone watching this live, if you do have a question for Craig about Sinister Design, RPGs, SRPGs, anything along those lines, let us know in the comments. But as I said a few moments ago, you're back on as you just released into Early Access Together in Battle. So for people watching this either live or recorded, what is kind of the pitch for Together?
Together in Battle is a procedural strategy RPG / team management game. If you've ever played, say, Mortal Glory, or, Gladius, or any of those sorts of games, it's kind of in that genre, but it also brings in a lot of strategy RPG and life sim elements that you don't generally see in games like that. So the way the core loop works in Together in Battle, it's actually kind of Persona inspired. The days are divided into daytime and nighttime. By day, you can shop, you can recruit characters, you can train, you can fight in turn-based tactical battles. And by night, the game becomes a social sim. Your characters become free to sort of do what they want. They talk to each other, they build friendships, they can fall in love, they can get into arguments, they have hobbies they'll pursue, they might practice and gain levels. Sometimes they'll have little personal crises and come to you for help. Sometimes they'll want advice in terms of how should I be, what should I be focusing on in my training? Should I learn this or this? Should I focus on this stat or this stat? And you'll have the opportunity to kind of guide them in the direction that you want them to go. Every character in the game is procedurally generated, and that's very common for, gladiator management sim type games. But what's not common for gladiator sim management type games is the amount of detail and depth that this game generates the characters with. Characters aren't just a random name and some stats. Characters have their own unique generated portraits, their own backgrounds, their own life skills, things they learned from before they became a gladiator that play out at night. They have their own hobbies. They have things that they like as gifts. They have their own personality traits. They also, on top of all this, they have their own families that the game generates for them, including what kind of relationship they have with each of their family members. And these things can show up in the game. They might get letters from family members. Family members can actually literally show up as random events at night and cause all kinds of drama.
And as you're describing kind of the life sim aspect of the game, that's one of the things that has been kind of when we look at some of the other indie RPGs and the strategy RPGs that have been released over the last decade, we've seen more games try to push into that angle. I think a probably a very recognizable name would be something like Battle Brothers, where, again, each character is their own unique element on the field, but then they have their entire background and stuff like that. And it's definitely a case, I think, of Mortal trying to add that personal touch to it. And I guess my question is, or my first question, I get in terms of like the product gen behind that, like how much work was it to try and like build this so that, you know, these characters like kind of quote unquote make sense in the game?
It was an enormous amount of work. And, you know, like that's mostly done. There are still little things I want to add in. Like the basis is there. It's just, you know, building out even more dozens of events that really call each character's unique qualities into the limelight. Because, you know, it doesn't really matter how much detail you're generating characters in if the player never sees it. So that's really the trick.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the challenge that we saw. You mentioned Gladius a few minutes ago. I remember playing that one. Feels like a very, very long time ago since I last tried that one. And it's always been that problem with a lot of these games, that the more kind of personality, the more, I guess, quote-unquote, fluff you add to the game, how does that actually, I guess, mean something to the player? I remember, what was it, Valkyria Chronicles. They had the whole deal with, like, the characters having different quirks. Like, this person has a hay fever or allergic to the grass. So if you pull them on the grasslands, they have negative accuracy. And, like, we really don't see things, like, go, like, even more beyond that. I would say maybe, like, the closest would be something like how Fire Emblem has transformed itself for, like, the last, I think it's, like, 7-8 years now. Adding more of that kind of life sim aspect to it.
Yeah, Fire Emblem has added more stuff kind of like that, but it's all
like more like
I'm trying to think of like a good word that doesn't sound super derogatory.
Yeah.
It's not dynamic. Let's put it that way, right? Character relationships can only go in one direction. And when they go in that direction, they play out exactly the same every time. You're never going to get, like, different variations. You're never going to get the opportunity to really, like, nudge things in one direction or another. And, you know, I do like the fact, as you were alluding to earlier, that Fire Emblem makes those relationships matter to the gameplay, right? You get these bonuses from having supports between characters in Fire Emblem. And it matters to the gameplay in Together in Battle as well, in large part because character morale affects combat performance. So if characters have higher morale, they will regen more energy when they rest in battle. They will deal more damage with their attacks. If they have bad morale, they will deal less damage with their attacks. And if their morale gets low enough, they might just straight up quit your team. So it's important to keep characters happy. And, you know, a lot of the detail in the simulation is about telling a story that has an impact on the gameplay because it affects your characters emotionally. Morale is the most sort of basic way in which that happens. Characters can also get into moods. Like if a character gets a particularly upsetting event, that will affect how they behave in camp for a few days, or, you know, if it's particularly bad, maybe even a week or two. Like if someone that they were in love with dies, they will probably go into mourning, and you will just see them being depressed around camp for a while. And that has knock-on effects for their morale and for the morale of the group.
And like as you're describing it, like it reminds it's like giving me like flashbacks to like something like back in the day of something like King of Dragon Pass that really tried to, even though it was very deterministic, or like it wasn't as, I think, freeform as what people were thinking, it still tried to give this idea that the characters you're playing as, or the characters that are working with you, aren't these static people. Like they have their own wants, their own ways of playing. And it's always that very, I think, interesting push. I want to get your thoughts on this as someone who's designed SRPGs, that when we have like games where like the characters can have these issues, like Darkest Dungeon would be another good example, with them, getting too much stress and then freaking out. It can lead to, I think, like that kind of downward spiral effect. And we've seen this in a lot of games where, one bad event causes another bad event, causes another one, and then my whole team is just, paranoid, heretic killing each other. And the player's just sitting there going, well, I can't do anything more. My whole team freaked out. But as we've said, like, it does add a lot more flavor. It adds a lot more choices that you wouldn't normally get. So my question is, like, how do you, I guess, like, balance these two extremes about, having very static, they just do the same thing every time, and, one run they can just freak out and your entire game ends kind of balance?
That is a balance I'm still working on. There's a reason I released this in early access. But yeah, it's my sort of design philosophy with this is you just need to give players the tools to respond so that they aren't just sort of at the mercy of RNG, right? There are a number of ways to, bring up character morale in Together in Battle. You can literally throw like a party. It costs a bunch of food and it takes up the evening, but it brings up everyone's morale, and it sort of forces everyone to socialize with each other, build stronger relationships. You can sort of call a character into a one-on-one. You can give them a bonus. Just paying them extra money will bring up their morale. You can give characters paid vacation. You can just like give them time off. Some characters will refuse if you do that. Like characters that are really disciplined will just be like, nah, I'd rather work. But for the most part, you can give characters time off. There are also items that characters will gain morale from. Like if you give them a particularly attractive piece of armor, beautiful is the tag the game uses. That will give them morale. You can buy characters cheap novels that will, they can use them and that'll raise their morale. There's all kinds of like little things, and also your choices. There's a lot of random events in the game where you have choices that you can make, and your choices impact character morale. Sometimes, the choice is just about not picking the thing that will hurt morale. And sometimes you have kind of a Hobson's choice where you really are basically just picking which of two characters are going to lose morale. So it's a balancing act.
I think, as you're saying, like, having the different options that the player can use could like kind of help mitigate or downplay the RNG is a very important point here. Because one of the issues I think we see with a lot of these games is that if it's completely out of the player's hands, that they just, one day the person freaks out, now they have negative 20% accuracy for the rest of their life, the player just sits there going, well, okay, that's it, kind of thing. But if you can give them ways of getting around it, I think ways of saying that if the best possible solution doesn't happen, what can I do to compensate for that, is very important. I think it's something that I've been like really paying attention to a lot more of the RPGs and strategy RPGs I've been playing, in terms of how much am I really going to have to dedicate to these games to even get like a possible win, versus say have enough tools, have enough ability so that if I don't get super awesome skill A, I can still, make lemons out of lemonade. And with something like with Together in Battle, I guess from a mechanic standpoint, I know when we last spoke, you were talking about telepath tactics and kind of building like the variety of moves and like that kind of, I don't think, kind of like immersive or emergent game design in terms of like how abilities can interact with each other. How has that aspect, I guess, like carried over or been involved with Together in Battle?
A large part of it is very much the same as in Telepath Tactics Liberated, but there are definitely things that are sort of altered to better fit the mold of Together in Battle. The fights are much faster, and they occur on smaller battlefields. So, there are some design changes there. Characters move less far to fit the battlefields better. And this has a sort of a salutary effect in terms of repositional abilities are now more powerful, right? Shoving a character now covers a larger percentage of the battlefield if you're like trying to give them a movement boost. Sprint, right? Getting a move boost suddenly makes a much bigger difference. And with these more compact battlefields, they're also just much more dense in terms of like areas of interest, choke points, differing elevations, places you can shove enemies into water or lava. It's just a lot more, I would say, sort of beats per minute, to use a metaphor, in terms of you just have a lot more packed into the encounters, which I like. I know at least one person on Steam who's upset that the battlefields are smaller, but that's the trade-off, right? It's just a different game that's paced differently. Now tying into the more unique parts of Together in Battle, there are new character skills that can arise from characters' past, life skills or from their personality traits. I would say actually mostly it's life skills. So like, if someone was a ventriloquist in the past, they have a skill where they can throw their voice to distract enemies. If a character was a dancer, they gain a skill called Twirl, where they just exchange positions with an ally or an enemy. You can just swap positions with an enemy, sort of against their will. There are tons of examples like that. If someone was like a trapper in the past, they can lay traps on the battlefield, regardless of what class they are. There's loads of little things like that.
In terms of like the character dynamics, as we said, like this more on the gladiatorial side, do characters like eventually like leave your party just because? Like, is there like an age kind of thing, or do they just stay until they are obviously killed in battle?
There isn't really an age mechanic. This game, while it does have a calendar system and it does sort of take place across a sort of in-game real-world time, the scale of it is small. It doesn't take place across more than like a single in-game year. So you're not going to have someone like, dying of old age, or, a couple producing children, or anything super, super dramatic like that.
Right. Is there still? I mean,
like, yeah.
I was just saying, like, is there still, or will there be like permadeath, like if a character does like fall in battle, or are there means of like bringing them back?
There are currently 3 different difficulty settings with different rules for what happens when a character falls in battle. There's relaxed mode, where if a character falls in battle, they'll just come back with 1 health. They'll be fine. They'll just need to rest for a few days. There is challenging mode, which is sort of the default, and there is a chance that a character will die if they fall in battle in challenging mode, depending on how far below 0 their health went. You'll sort of be kept in suspense over a number of days as they, recover, or potentially fail to recover. And then there is brutal mode, which is just straightforward Fire Emblem style permadeath. They fall in battle, that's it, they're done.
And in terms of like the party sizes, like how many characters are like allowed like on a field at one time?
So for most battles, you'll be fielding 6 characters at a time. I find that's like a pretty good spot for battles of the size that you'll be fielding these characters in. But there are some battles where you can field more, generally up to, like, say, 8.
And I think that's
which, again, is still... Yeah, it's still smaller than most of the battles in Telepath Tactics Liberated, but, definitely within, standard SRPG battle size, I'd say.
And I think, like, for me, I'm starting to, like, prefer some of, like, the smaller battles, just because it makes, as you were saying earlier, it makes things a little bit more snappier in terms of how they can play out. Because I'm still having like horrible memories of playing the original XCOM. There's like 16 to 20 people you had to move out of the Sky Ranger one at a time at the start of every mission.
Yeah, you can have a roster of up to 18 characters in Together in Battle, but you definitely can't field them all at once. Like, if you have a roster that big, first of all, I'm impressed because that's a lot of money to spend on payroll. If you're doing that, email me and let me know how you're making that work. But if you have a larger roster, that just means you have more fresh people you can sort of cycle in while other people are recovering from fights.
Mm-hmm. And with kind of like move or cycling people in, that's another thing. Like, I think we spoke about this in our first show. We're talking more about SRPG design in general, but that issue of the one character being the experience sponge and how to get around that. So how does like leveling up and progression work in Together in Battle?
So there are a couple of sort of parallel systems for progressing characters in Together in Battle. There is just the regular old gain experience through fighting method, which you know how that works. You fight, you defeat enemies, you get experience, you level up. In the evening, you can have characters perform group drills, which will gain them experience. They can level up that way. It does hurt morale a little bit, so it's not like super ideal to do that unless everyone is feeling really good. Characters will also sometimes just practice in the evening on their own, depending on what they feel like doing and depending on their personality traits. Apart from all of that, you can gain experience for characters by buying them battle primers in the shop. The shop is full of all kinds of cool stuff. And then, wholly aside from gaining experience and gaining levels, there is a trainer that you can send characters off to and just directly increase their stats wholly apart from their current level. And that costs money, and it means your character won't be available for a couple days, but that's a thing you can do, and it does cause characters to become more powerful than their level would suggest.
And that's actually, I think, a good segue into the next question, because another thing we were talking about is kind of like how much like gear versus stats matters in games like this. And kind of like the old Disgaea, where, the gear is kind of secondary to the numbers that it provides. So with Together in Battle, like, how does like that factor in? Like, is this a case where a character that has super high stats and, very crappy gear is far better than a character that has amazing gear but poor stats?
It depends. So, long term, having better stats is better than having better gear simply because weapons have durability, right? A character with terrible stats but an amazing sword, once their sword breaks, they're just a character with crappy stats.
Mm-hmm.
But, that said, no one is going to have a team that starts out at level 1 with, eye-popping stats, right? You have to work towards that. And while you're doing that, getting good gear is extremely helpful. This game really expands on the equipment generation procedure that I created while I was finishing up Telepath Tactics Liberated. There are just a huge variety of potential weapons, armor, accessories, and consumables you can use that absolutely make a difference in battle. And it's all just a balancing act, right? You have to keep enough resources to feed everyone. You have to make payroll. But everything you can spend on training and on getting better equipment, that's going to make a difference. I would say getting better equipment will usually make a more immediate difference in terms of battle. But again, it's about short-term versus long-term investment on some level there.
And I was looking at the store page. You were saying earlier the game kind of takes place over the course of like a year in game time. Is there finishing the game, or at least right now within early access, is there like a quote unquote like fixed endpoint, Or is it more of a case of like completing a certain number of objectives?
Right now, the early access build that's on Steam right now, you complete it by reaching the end of Gario League. There is a qualifier that you will go and face to get into the next league, Snow Leopard League, but I haven't created that yet. That's not yet in the game. So, and that's player directed progression. Like how far you get in the arena is sort of up to you as the player because you decide how you're spending your days. But there are also events which occur sort of at fixed points in the calendar. And those are plot events for the most part. Like the Festival of the Ascendant Lights, that will always occur on a specific day, and specific things will happen when you hit the Festival of the Ascendant Lights. There are going to be a lot more plot events and even plot battles that are tied to the calendar. I haven't put them in the game yet, but they will be happening.
And with kind of like the enemy designs in the game, how does I know there's something that we spoke about last time with Telepath, with having all these unique abilities and all how the AI can use them. Does the AI follow like very much that same behavior you set in Telepath, that they can kind of use the same tricks and tactics as you can?
Yep. Yeah, they have access to the exact same classes, the exact same skills, and they know how to use pretty much everything pretty well. One thing I added into the game recently is the AI now knows how to shove characters into each other for collision damage. So if you line characters up and you've got someone really tanky in the front who's not going to take a lot of damage from the attack, but you've got a squishier character behind them, they might just walk up and just shove one into the other instead of attacking normally.
And I'm assuming that the battles themselves are procedurally generated as well?
The arena battles mostly are procedurally generated. The league qualifiers are kind of like boss fights. Those are handmade. But all the fights leading up to those are procedurally generated.
And I was just about to ask, how do boss battles or elite encounters how's that play into the game?
So there are a few different sort of general categories of battle within the game. There are just regular pickup matches that you can just walk into the arena. The game will generate a battlefield with environmental hazards, some chests you can try to loot as optional objectives. It will pick a battlefield condition from a list of different things that can sort of befall the battlefield, like fog of war, or it can it could be raining. Maybe the crowd is impatient and you have to complete the battle faster than usual. Maybe the enemy team is feeling really antsy and they're going to go first. There are just all these different possible conditions. Sometimes thieves will show up on the battlefield and try to steal the loot. Sometimes you'll get a fan in the stance who'll try to throw you an item. Just different things can happen. These are small encounters that are very self-contained. They've got all kinds of different tactical elements to them. Environmental hazards, differing elevations, and so on. And those are just regular pickup battles. You fight them for money. They're relatively quick. Then, when you have completed a certain number of battles in the arena, you will become eligible for a league qualifier. And that is a handmade battle against an enemy team. It's a boss fight. And if you win, you get to progress to the next league. And that league will have different rules for how its battles are generated. The battlefields will look different. There will be different objects that spawn on the battlefield. The enemy composition will generally be a little different. So each league has its own sort of flavor and its own boss that is at the top of it. And then, aside from all those, you also can get into battles outside the arena. And these tend to come in the form of random events. Thieves can attack your camp at night. You can get petitioned by various people around the city of Kalkarapur. help me, bandits attacked my caravan. Help me with this other thing, I'm being attacked by an angry mob. I want to pay you to drive workers who are striking out of my business. And, you have a choice for like how you respond to all of these. And these have also handmade battles that are sort of appropriate to the scenario.
Mm-hmm. And like speaking about like the battles, one thing I wanted to ask you, like this is like another like kind of more like high level RPG question for you, is the idea of like losing in some of these games or losing in battle. Like I was playing another strategy RPG the other night. I think it was a Shard Punk Verminfall. Whew. It's kind of like XCOM meets a Vermintide in a way. And it is very much in that same line like Darkest Dungeon, that the character falls in battle, if you can't get them in time, they're gone, that's it for the run kind of thing. And one of the challenges that I see with some of these games is, I guess, how painful is a loss? Like as you said, like Live Together and Battle, this is more like gladiatorial management meets like life sim kind of aspect. Is like a loss in battle like a run ender, or like how punishing is it if the player messes up like that?
Well, it largely depends on the difficulty level they're playing on. So if you're playing on brutal difficulty, if you lose characters, it is going to be very hard to climb up out of that hole. But if you're playing on relaxed and a bunch of characters fall in battle, you're probably fine. Like, they'll lose a little morale, but after a few days, they'll be good to go again. Challenging is somewhere in the middle. It depends on how badly you messed up. Like, if someone goes into, like, if someone hits, like, negative 40 health because you let them get backstabbed when they were already almost dead, that could end pretty badly, especially if they have a lot of characters who really care about them. The more friendship characters have built up and the more romance characters have built up, the more strongly they react if a character dies. So, character death can be very punishing in the game. But, unless you're playing on brutal, character death also shouldn't be super common. Like, it is something that the game is designed for you to be able to recover from. And that is something I'm still sort of tweaking balance on around the margins.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and again, it's like that kind of difference between like RPGs that are built like each battle being like do or die versus kind of like the grand campaign structure where you have an overall goal, but if you lose one or two battles, as long as you're not, as you said, like as long as you're not losing like heavily, you can still kind of keep going.
Yeah, so this game is designed with a very different philosophy from games like Darkest Dungeon, where your characters are kind of interchangeable and the game kind of wants you to like suffer casualties, and it's kind of unavoidable because sometimes you're just gonna get crit. Like Battle Brothers, right?
Yeah.
Like you'll be in a battle in Battle Brothers and, under the hood, the game will be like, hey, guess what? I'm going to decapitate one of your characters and there's nothing you can do about it. Eat that.
Yeah.
Enjoy. Suck that down. And you just have to be like, okay, I guess that character is just instantly dead now. That's cool. That is something I don't want together in battle for a few reasons. Just it does not agree with me on a design philosophy level, but it also, I think, undermines at least my goals with Together in Battle, having something like that happen. I want people to get attached to these characters. Like, these characters are generated with enough layers that you can keep learning about them for quite some time. And if characters are just dropping like flies left and right, then players are never going to see, all of the facets of these characters.
And also, like, as a consequence, it also makes a lot of the decision making that the player can do kind of moot. Like, I spend 15, 20 minutes picking all the perfect gear and making sure they're all cultivated, and then they take 3 steps out, crit arrow, they're dead.
Yes, I'm also not a fan of that for just general gameplay reasons. Just as a player, I feel like there's like a certain amount of RNG. I'm using a sort of term of art here for people who don't know. It stands for random number generation, right? There's a certain level of randomness in a battle system that I think can add flavor to the proceedings and can make it feel a little more lively, but some games, I think, go too far. Like, if you can just instantly lose a character in one hit based on factors outside of your control, or based on factors that aren't made immediately obvious to you as a player, I hate that. I don't want that in my games.
Yep, and again, it's that, as you were saying earlier, like, kind of like the difference between like the philosophy in a game like a Darkest Dungeon, where, and I've seen this with a lot of like other indie games lately, that they often put like on their opening page, this game is meant to be hard. You are going to lose characters. And it's definitely like a very interesting, I think, like design. I don't want to say it's like an issue, but it's definitely like very polarizing. Like, there's that difference between a game where the game is kind of setting you up for failure. That they know that most likely you're going to lose on this first battle, and there's nothing you could have done otherwise. Even if you know about the game, it's just that the odds are stacked against you. Where other games, it's more like, as you were saying with Together in Battle, that failure is kind of like the most extremely worst outcome, but it's not supposed to be happening every battle or every 5 to 10 minutes. And I think I prefer that style just because it, as you're saying, like, it feels really bad as a player to know, well, I lost and there was just, the game just decided this point, to roll tails and say, well, tails you lose, goodbye, start over again.
Yeah. Yeah, there are definitely some, like, I have more work to do on Together in Battle on that front. Not in terms of, like, players just randomly losing, because that's not really a thing. Like, there are random events in Together in Battle, but, as far as, like, how you spend your time and what orders you give in battle, that's all under your control. And it is definitely possible to succeed. It is difficult, though. And, it's a little bit like a traditional roguelike in the sense that, you do have to build up familiarity with the systems and develop the skills in order to learn how to navigate those systems successfully. But, that said, I don't want it to be super duper punishing. At least not on normal difficulty. Brutal difficulty is called brutal for a reason, but normal difficulty is called challenging, and I'm still trying to find that sweet spot. So I'm still actively making changes in the pursuit of that. One thing that I've actually found pretty interesting is that a lot of my fans are very experienced with strategy RPGs. They're very good at navigating the battles and all of the new stuff that Together in Battle brings, all of the economic simulation side of things, is very new to folks. And I think a lot of them are like, oh, I'm good at battles, I'm going to go on the hardest difficulty. And then they are discovering that actually there are entirely different skills you need in order to succeed in Together in Battle that they maybe don't have as much experience with. So I'm finding myself having to kind of tone down the intensity of the whole, like, make payroll or things go south really quick elements.
Oh, yes. And, like, for me, like, it's one of the things I find really enjoy about kind of, like, the management sim aspect of a lot of games. Like, a lot of games that have, like, that kind of, like, RPG layer and management side of trying to kind of, like, square the two together. I think that's kind of, like, what I wonder if that's what kind of drew a lot of people to the original XCOM. This idea that, hey, you send characters out to die, but you also need to make sure to keep your checkbook in the black and, make sure you funded enough laser research this month.
Yeah, there's no research in Together in Battle. Like all the new skills you get just come from characters leveling up, and all the new equipment you get comes either from RNG or from performing quests that ingratiate you to the shopkeepers so you get better equipment generated for you. But there's still a lot of focus on resource management. Like you have to make sure you have your weapons in good enough shape. You have to make sure you have food. You have to make sure you have enough money for payroll. And it's a balancing act. And it's a balance that can be hard to strike if you aren't familiar with the systems.
Actually, that takes me to an interesting question I wanted to ask you. Like, with regard to your playtesters or to your hardcore fans who are kind of running into that wall when it comes to the management side, are there any commonalities or common things that are getting them stuck, or is everyone having different issues with it?
I'm still figuring that out. I only just released the game yesterday, but one thing I did notice is that a lot of players were getting into situations where they had hired very expensive team members and then had to meet a payroll that was really quite high. I might need to go in and, tweak some things under the hood to keep that from happening. I'm still not 100% sure what's going on in those situations, but I mean, I've playtested the game quite a bit, and it's been a very long time since I've run into a situation where I couldn't make payroll, but I think I may also just have a different perspective on hiring than a lot of new players, because I have a sense going in of okay, how much money can I expect to make in the arena? So I don't know. I'm experimenting with new ways to kind of give players a little more slack in terms of how they make things work. One thing I'm adding into the game right now is I'm currently shifting from a strict pick one thing to do during the day system to a time point system, right? Either you can spend all of your time points going to the arena, or you can divvy up your time points doing some more prosaic stuff like going to the shop or recruiting new characters or training. I'm also now just starting to experiment with a system where you can send characters off to just, perform manual labor for the day. You can just hire them out and get some extra income that way. You won't be able to do that at the same time as you're going to the arena, but, could be a way to get some supplemental income or, get some utility out of characters that are currently too hurt to fight.
Mm-hmm. I think, for me, what's always interesting in these games where you can, recruit characters, I always tend to focus on, lower level characters, so I want to cultivate them more. But it is that kind of, weird economy, because we see this in, I think it's, another very interesting about player behavior, is that you show someone, hey, this character's level 7, this character's level 2, who you going to want on your team? Everyone's going to immediately go, I want the level 7 guy. But if he's, 8 times more expensive to field, you're not going to really get that return on investment early on.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't generally get characters that are 8 times as expensive as other characters in this game. The swings aren't quite that wild in terms of who you can recruit at any given point in time. But, you will get, characters that... One of the invisible factors that goes into character generation in the game is there's an invisible number called greed. It's literally, I believe, called the greed factor in the code base. And basically what it does is it just sort of arbitrarily skews that character's salary upwards or downwards. So just because a character is more expensive, that doesn't mean they're better. Sometimes you will find characters who are really good and they also cost less. You just kind of have to have an eye for like who's a good character to hire, and that's something that comes with experience.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I want to ask you before I forget, you mentioned earlier about having like a procedural generation for like gear and equipment. And I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail about like how like gear works, or like what does like really fantastic gear look like compared to really poor gear.
Sure. So yeah, there are a bunch of modifiers. People who have sort of engaged with the system will call it like a Diablo 2 style equipment generation system. You have sort of a base type of equipment. You have a material that it's made with, and then there are modifiers that can attach to it that alter its properties. So just for example, right, you can have an iron talwar, right? That's a kind of sword. And that has, it gives you like whatever it is, +7 strength, and it has, I think, a default like 40 uses, and it grants you the ability to use the sword attack. If you have the ability to equip swords, you can equip it. It does that for you. That's just the standard, but it can have modifiers depending on how it's generated. So depending on the quality setting for that store, the quality level of the goods they sell, it can have negative modifiers, right? It can be shoddy, old, or worn, which decreases the number of uses that it has. There are low quality, modifiers in terms of like its sharpness that decrease the amount of damage it does. There are only like a few negative modifiers that attach. There are a lot more positive modifiers that you get for, shopping at a place that has higher quality, or simply having higher quality weapons generated in various ways, which is a fun thing. You can get characters that are blacksmiths, and they can create weapons for you. They're literally just generating unique weapons for your team. Anyway, that was just an aside. Probably the best weapons you can get are from a random event. If a character gets a letter saying, "Oh, come home, we have a family heirloom we want to give you," and they ask for time off, if you can afford to give them time off, you should do it, because they will return with an absolutely killer weapon. Those weapons are unique named weapons that are absolutely top tier in terms of quality, and the buffs they can get are just kind of insane. They can have modifiers like Gorgeous, which gives a +4 permanent morale boost when it's equipped. They can get something like an extra +5 to strength relative to just their baseline quality and material. They can give you like 20% bonus dodge, so you're just dodging all kinds of attacks. They can be burning, which gives you like bonus fire damage with every attack and can set enemies on fire. They can be poisoned, which gives bonus poison damage and can poison enemies. They can be gap seeking, which means that they will deal bonus damage when they hit from behind or the side. There are colossal weapons that give every attack knockback. And if you're using a skill that has knockback, it will give it extra knockback. Which is amazing if you're like, hitting them into something, because then they also get bonus collision damage on top of everything else. There are staggering weapons that enemies, when they're hit, they cannot counterattack. There are balanced weapons that boost accuracy and increase the likelihood that status effects will take hold when the enemy is hit. There are, I could go on and on. There's like a zillion different modifiers, and which modifiers you get on weapons just depends on the roll of the dice. But every time you enter the shop, you get a different selection of weapons, and there's a chance for each of those weapons to have a really cool modifier that you have a choice to either pony up for or be like, yeah, I should probably save it for payday,
Mm-hmm. And with the durability system, are you able to repair gear like when it gets too low, or is it just a case of you use it until it hits 0 and then you toss it out and go to another piece?
So it's in many ways it's like classic Fire Emblem in that you just kind of use it until it hits 0, but characters have 12 inventory slots, and they can and probably should carry alternate weapons, right? Like, if you're facing off against an enemy that's got like only 5 health left, and you're equipped with, you know, the Godslayer, maybe swap to just your regular Iron Talwar to finish the guy off so you're not, you know, taking uses off of it. That said, some characters have the ability to repair your group's weapons, and sometimes they will choose to do that in the evening. So those are good characters to have around if you're fielding a group that is very weapon heavy.
And with, I guess, like, kind of the weapon designs, like, with, like, the modifiers themselves, like, is there, like, anything, like, built, I guess, into the procedural generation to make sure that, like, stats or, like, bonus modifiers are, like, weapon or class specific? Like, I guess, like, an example would be, you know, this bow has a positive for close range warriors, or this spell book gives you plus sniping with an arrow or something like that.
There aren't any modifiers that only benefit specific classes that I can think of. Like, there are certain modifiers that go better with certain classes. Like, for example, a plus accuracy mace is going to be inherently more valuable than a plus accuracy sword, because mace users have access to a lot more skills that inflict status effects. But having plus accuracy on a sword is still good. You know, you're still going to want that if you're dealing with enemy assassins who have dodge, or if you're trying to flush enemies out of tall grasses where they get a dodge bonus.
All right.
But there are, like, there's so many different modifiers, and they give characters a special niche when they have weapons that play to certain play styles. Like, there's a whole set of modifiers I didn't even talk about that give bonus damage against enemies equipped with certain weapon types. And it's not a weapon triangle thing, right? Because it isn't like this trumps this trumps this. It's just, I literally saw the other day a character equipped with an axe-catching axe. It's an axe that deals bonus damage against enemies who are using axes. Amazing.
I guess that's an interesting question. Like, for people watching, so you're live recorded. So, is there any kind of, I guess, like a balancing system, as you said, like is there, like, there's no weapon triangle? Is there any kind of, like, rock paper scissors in this game, or is it just a case of, you know, I smack you, you smack me until one of us goes down?
I would never in a million years describe this as a game where I smack you, you smack me until one of us goes down. That is like, that would be like a grave insult. Someone told me my game was like that. There are a lot of different factors that go into what moves you should use. And, you know, it's all very situationally dependent. This is a game that expects you to think on your feet and really be aware of what the environment you're fighting in looks like, what spaces you want to engage enemies on, and what skills you want to bring to bear from which characters. So I'll just give you an example. Some characters they're called psi fighters. It's a sort of general class of character that in most games they would be called casters, right? There isn't magic in this universe, but psi fighters have access to ranged abilities that can inflict really pretty nasty status effects and can deal quite a lot of damage. So one example of this is the pyrokineticist. Pyrokineticists can deal quite a lot of damage with a skill called Pyroblast, and they can set one of your units on fire, which will cause them to continue taking damage for another 2 rounds. And they can lose up to 40% of their health just from being on fire, so it's very bad. If you see a pyrokineticist, and you see an opportunity to get them to a space where you can then shove them into water, that's great. Because then, even if you don't kill them, they're neutralized until they get out of the water, they take drowning damage, they have to lose energy swimming back to shore. It's great. And there's all kinds of different classes that can accomplish that. If you have a kineticist, they can pull them into the water at range. If you have a character that can lay traps, you can lay down a snare trap, move exactly to the edge of that character's maximum range and kind of bait them into the trap. And then, have someone run up and shove them into the water. There's a bunch of different tactics you can use if you're thinking creatively and using the tools the game gives you. And, this game has over 155 different skills. So there are quite a few tools that you can use to accomplish this stuff.
And this was something that I know we spoke about, I think either on the last discussion or the one before that, and it was something that I was thinking about a lot when I was writing my book, specifically on the chapters on balancing in RPGs, is having these different skills and making sure they all feel like situationally viable. Because at the end of the day, if you have a skill that, let's say, pushes an enemy 1 square, does 2 points of damage, or giant fireball from the sky does 8,000 points of damage, why would anyone ever want to do that little tiny shove? And this was something that has always been that challenge in a lot of these RPGs, is making the skills that don't necessarily do damage feel really good to use. That you feel clever knocking the enemy in the water, or pushing them into a tree, or off a ledge, or something like that.
Yeah, Together in Battle, like Telepath Tactics Liberated, is a game where those skills can be far more effective than Super Duper Fireball of Death. Especially because, energy, or mana, if you want to use the sort of standard term, it's not unlimited, right? You have a whole battle to get through. And, that is more of a factor in Telepath Tactics Liberated. And Together in Battle, the battles aren't that long, but you don't immediately recover from them. So it's still to your advantage to dispatch your enemies as economically as possible if you can. And skills like Shove, they don't cost energy. You can just run up and shove someone into the water or off a cliff, and if that neutralizes them while saving, energy, then that just accrues to your advantage.
And that's when we get into kind of like the more interesting aspects of the management sim side of things. This idea that elements and stuff that you do in the battle will carry over. And like we said earlier, like weapon gear, or weapon durability, you don't want to waste. If this weapon does 27 points of damage and this guy only has like 1 point of health left, maybe don't use that weapon and save that crucial hit for, his buddy who's still at full health.
Yep.
One thing that I didn't ask you that I also want to bring up before I forget, in terms of class designs, you mentioned earlier, of course, like the different like backgrounds, like Trapper, Dancer, and so on. In terms of classes, is there any kind of progression on that front? Like for fans of Fire Emblem, they remember the ability for characters to evolve into like 1 to 3 different versions of a class.
Yeah, when you say evolve, are you talking about
like promotion,
class promotions?
Yeah.
Yes. So each member of a class is, even setting aside like the life skill, background, personality trait, all that stuff, even setting all that aside, each individual instance of a class is different from every other instance because they have a different skill progression. There are like different variations of like skills that members of a class can learn. Okay. So even if you have like 2 Cavaliers, even if you weren't looking at any of their individual differences, they would still probably be different because they would have a different skill progression. And then once you hit promotion, that's another point of differentiation, and that's one that you have direct control over. You can branch off into one of a couple of different promoted classes as of right now, and I am looking to add in more promotion variants as time goes on to offer more customizability to players who are interested in having characters focus in different ways. So just to give one example, right? Swordsmen can become they can either become blade dancers who are very good at. Actually, let me look this up because I feel like I'm about to give you false information. What is the difference? So one of them, see, let me actually get the name of this right. Okay, one is Blade Master, one is Blade Dancer, one is Sword Master. The Blade Dancer gets increased dodge, reduced energy use for the use of double strike, and gets a disarming strike skill that damages enemies, and also, if they have a weapon, prevents them from counterattacking for the entire rest of the turn. Very powerful. And then, on the other hand, you have Sword Masters. Sword Masters have greater strength, they have better defense, and they gain a new equipment mastery. They can equip Great Shields. Great Shields boost their health quite a bit, and also give them access to a skill called Defensive Stance, which has a 50% chance to simply block all incoming attacks for the rest of the round. So, two very different specializations with different strengths, and you kind of decide based on what this character's abilities are and what kind of battlefield roles you need filled. Okay, which of these am I more interested in having upon promotion?
Mm-hmm. And as a quick time check, we are just at an hour in, so I figure maybe another 10 minutes or so that works for you. And
Sure.
If anyone is watching us live, if you do have any questions, this will be final call for. The chat has been relatively quiet, but that sometimes happens when we do late night casts, I see. But it will be, of course, available in the recorded version. One question I want to ask you, in terms of the kind of management sim side itself, are you able to upgrade your camp, or are you able to spend resources, I guess improving the utilities of what you can do outside of combat?
That is not currently a thing in the game.
Okay.
I feel like at this point, players probably have enough things to worry about spending money on. My players feel a little overwhelmed already, I think, so I'm going to kind of keep it to the options available and try to just give them more tools for, dealing with the things that they have.
And let me see, I'm trying to think, I just had a question. About the management sim side. I guess with the skills, I guess just to clarify then, so with with each class, so every character gets different skills out of that class. I guess how many skills does each class kind of have generally?
That's a good question. I would say maybe if we're counting all variations, I'd say probably somewhere between 8 and 12.
Okay. One thing that I didn't ask you about, in terms of the combat system itself, are you, in terms of, what a character can do move by move, is this a game where, every character has, 2 to 3 actions, and whatever 3 actions you perform, that's your turn? Is it more like an energy-based system where, walking takes 5 points of energy, attacking takes 10, and when you're too low of the energy, that character ends their turn? How does the kind of character by character control work in the game?
So I would describe it as it's sort of based on Fire Emblem, but more flexible. So most skills are, you can move and you can use the skill, and when you've used the skill, your turn is over. It's very straightforward, easy to understand, and you don't have to deal with the AI, hitting you with skills and then kiting you all the time, so you're constantly chasing enemies down. I hate when SRPGs do that, it's super annoying. But there are other skills that have different effects for how the game treats them after the skill is used. So for example, Sprint. Sprint does not end your turn, and it does not keep you from using other skills afterwards. So you can use Sprint, gain the move bonus, run up, and use a turn-ending attack, right? That's very straightforward. There are some skills that you use them, and you can keep moving, but you can't use other skills afterwards. So, for example, the Bowman's Bow attack, or the Cavalier's Lance attack. You can run up, shoot your shot, and then you can retreat. right? These are very specifically strengths of those classes that allow you to move out of the way for other characters to do follow-up attacks, or simply you can use it to harass enemies with hidden run maneuvers. And then there are skills which you can use literally an unlimited number of times, and your only limitation is how much energy you have available to spend on them. So an example of that would be engineers. Engineers can build bridges. And they can just keep moving and building bridge tiles as long as they have energy and movement points left to spend. And, it's kind of like, what does the situation demand and what can you make work?
And do the characters recover like all energy like on the start of the next round, or like a fixed percent?
Characters recover energy automatically under two circumstances. Circumstance number one, if they sit still and do nothing else, like if literally they just sit there for their turn, they will recover +4 energy, or if they have high morale, +5 energy. If they move, but don't use a skill, they get +1, or if they have high morale, +2 energy. So there's a trade-off there, even when deciding whether to use character skills or not. Like, there is a benefit to just having characters sit on their ass and do nothing for a turn. That is like a conscious tactical choice you can make in order to regain energy for when you need it to perform a more laborious attack or, support ability on a future turn.
All right. Let me see if there's anything else. I guess one other question. I think this will probably be like one of my last ones for you for tonight. In terms of like building the UI for Together in Battle, as you said, like this one features a lot more on the management sim side rather than just being pure combat. How was it, I guess, like designing the UI for this game to make sure that things are clear, or there are any interesting challenges that went into it?
I don't like designing UI. All of it was difficult and all of it was challenging. I don't know if I can think of like one specific thing that was. I'll say this. I designed the user interface with the possibility of supporting controllers in mind. So there were some places where I kind of ended up with a sort of like awkward middle ground that isn't super ideal, and at some point I should probably theoretically address that, but as previously mentioned, I really hate designing UI, so we'll see.
All right. I think, other than just like kind of like logistics related questions, I'm about out of them for like design wise for Together in Battle. Anything that we didn't touch on yet from a design standpoint they like to bring up?
Nothing really comes to mind. I think you covered some pretty good ground here.
Thank you. So I think with that, I guess my final set of questions for you is kind of like more logistics related regarding Together in Battle in early access. So first one is, as we are streaming / recording this now, the game's been out on EA for 1 day. Do you have an estimated timetable for how long it's going to stay in early access?
Yeah, I'm thinking probably 1 year. I want to flesh out some more random events. I want to finish up the arena battle sort of quest line. And I want to get the proper main plot and proper plot battles into the game as well. And of course, bugs. Obviously, you got to fix bugs. So 1 year seems like a pretty reasonable time frame to make all of that happen. If, at some point, some larger YouTuber decides to show the game and, their viewers decide to flock to it as a large group and, it suddenly sells super well and suddenly I'm like, in a Vampire Survivor situation, then hey, maybe I'll take more than a year on it. Maybe I will sit in my chair and just sort of type away for a few years and, just keep making it deeper and deeper and better and better. But whether that makes economic sense is kind of out of my hands. It's sort of up to everyone else. So that's my answer. 1 year minimum. If the fates favor me, maybe longer.
And I guess with regards to kind of like where you want like the story and the content to grow, do you like see like adding like we were talking about before, like kind of difference between like having like a fixed battle versus one that is relatively fixed under certain circumstance or conditions? Will there ever be kind of like a named fight? You're fighting against like a fixed super unit boss guy, or are battles going to be built more, I guess, like generalized in that?
There are definitely going to be plot-based boss battles. That is definitely a thing that's planned. I don't know if it's going to be like, against one super unit, because, this is a kind of a roughly Fire Emblem style game, and you don't generally get SRPG battles in that mold. Usually it's you against an enemy force with some sort of unique twist, or, there will be a regular enemy force, but one commander who's very powerful, and you have to sort of deal with it as a whole tactical situation.
All right. And with like kind of the release of the game, do you see it going to port it to other platforms, or will it stay exclusively on Steam?
Hard to say. I would like to have it on other platforms, but that takes time and that takes energy, and if I can spend that time and energy making the game better, given the choice, I generally opt to just make the game better. But from a business standpoint, I should probably aim to get it onto consoles at some point.
All right. I think with that, I am out of questions. Any final like points about design, development, anything like even just random about Together in Battle you want to bring up before we wrap things up?
Nah, I think I'm good. I think we covered it pretty thoroughly.
We could always just jump in and talk about what an RPG is, and be here for another like 8-9 hours. We could certainly fill that time up.
Yeah, we certainly could.
Yeah.
I know I sent to you an article I wrote back in, what was it, like 2011 or something, a zillion years ago. My own thoughts about what an RPG is, but I can throw that out real fast if you want to hear that. But otherwise, I
think we can wrap things up here. And again, you are more than welcome to come back on later down the line. We talk more about Together in Battle, or just rave about RPG systems for an hour or two. We'll see like how the conversation goes.
That's my stupid party trick. I can rant about RPGs on command.
There you go. It's a good trick to have, at least around here. But I think with that, let us wrap things up for tonight. So, Craig, again, thank you so much for coming back on. Congratulations on the early access release, and best of luck for the next year of developing the game.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
All right, before I let you go, do you have any social medias you would like to plug, places, whatever?
Oh, yeah. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I have an Instagram, although I very seldom use that. Really, the biggest thing I would recommend people do is go find Together in Battle on Steam. Go buy it, or wishlist it, or, do something beneficial with it. Because, the game it's got a lot of promise. It's very fun and deep, and I want your suggestions. I want your perspective on what I can do to really bring it to its full potential, because like I've got ideas, but I want to hear what you think.
All right. So with that, my final question is, do you have anything you'd like to say to the fans to take us out on for tonight?
Yeah, hi. If you're a fan of mine, thank you for watching, and more importantly, thank you for being a fan. I I I love all of you. It makes such a huge difference to my life to know that there are people out there who really love my games and follow my games and care about my games. It's very meaningful to me. So from the bottom of my heart to my fans, thank you so much.
All right. So with that, we are going to end things for tonight's show. So for everyone watching this live or recorded, thank you for tuning in. For me, do all the YouTube stuff, bell ringing, subscribing, and all that. You'll find links on my Twitter, Discord, all that stuff down there and up there on the overlay. If you are a developer or working on a game or just want to talk design and development with me, please reach out. I'm always looking for a guest for these live and recorded shows. So again, Craig, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm sure we'll chat again in the coming months.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And with that, everyone, we are done. So be sure to come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And until our next show, take care.